It seems like the only dreams I can ever remember are nightmares. For as long as I can remember, I have never been able to recall a positive, or at the very least, not a creepy dream. So, I have decided to compile a list of the dreams I remember. Maybe there is something to them. Here goes. September 4th, 2009. I stood at my doorstep, looking down the swirling path the staircases take from the 4th floor. I stood there just for a single moment before my mother came out running through the door. She said something, but I could not make out what it was. I did not even look at her, and I jumped down. When I landed, my feet felt as if I had shattered every bone in them. But otherwise, I was unscathed. I heard a scream from above, and then my mother came crashing down on the floor next to me. Her body hit the floor with violent force, and it split her head open. I looked into her glazed-over, lifeless eyes and woke up. October 16th, 2011. I was standing on top of some building. As if I had just glanced backward, my body felt as if I was being chased by something. I did not understand what it was, but I could feel the sped-up heartbeat within my chest, the sharpness of everything around me, and something flowing through my body. I looked down, and I could not see anything, but I could not see the ground behind me. My vision blinked. I presume I turned around again because I felt as if the pressure had gotten worse, and I just jumped down. Everything went black with a sickening crunch. I woke up in a cold sweat. March 3rd, 2012. I found myself in the middle of some medieval battlefield. Corpses covered the ground as far as my eyes could see. Each one of them was mutilated in a fashion worse than the previous one. Bones sticking out through the skin, guts pulled out, brain matter. There's rivers of blood pooling from within these bodies, and everything smelled so real. The smell of rot nearly knocked me off my feet. Some sort of beast was eating one of those corpses, producing disgusting sounds of tearing flesh. I could not really make it out, but it looked like some sort of deformed dog. The beast turned to me, and I woke up. December 8th, 2012. I found myself in a pool of black liquid inside a dark space, completely lightless. I looked around but could not make out anything. Suddenly a burst of light passed over my head, temporarily blinding me, before a blood-chilling scream filled the space, sending a wave of worry across my body. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of the world around me. That is when I saw something moving in the liquid. Something massive. Moments later, I saw a gigantic white orb right next to me. Everything went black, and it felt like someone had run a flaming sword straight through the center of my body. I woke up, and my whole left side felt sore. April 12th, 2015. I found myself at an open field where everything seemed to lack color. Everything seemed dull and kind of chilly. I walked around the field until I noticed that there was a man's shadow behind the tree line. I followed the shadow into the trees, and it disappeared. I walked around the forest for what seemed like hours until a burst of loud, high-pitched laughter boomed all around me, sending shivers down my spine. I turned around, and there was nothing. I looked around, calling out to whomever this laughter could have belonged to, but no answer came. The laughter crackled again, this time awfully close behind me. I turned around to see a corpse-like figure floating in the air, bluish skin, bloated with clouded eyes. Its smile, oh God, that awful smile. It was so wide, I swear I could see the skin beginning to crack, revealing black blood beneath it. I wanted to wake up, but I could not. I was frozen, face to face with that thing. We stared at each other until I felt its hand touching my shoulder. Frozen touch, so cold it felt like I was being cut. I woke up, and my shoulder was numb. March 20th, 2016. I was walking around aimlessly in my apartment, and I felt someone or something touch me. And whenever it happened, I looked back and saw nothing. Whenever this happened, I felt shivers run down my spine, and the whole atmosphere of the dream was stressful and cold. It kept on happening a few times before I felt a hand on the top of my head. I turned to look upwards and woke up. February 1st, 2017. Not much of a nightmare, but still weird as hell. I was being shouted at by this gigantic monster mask thing without a body inside an endless dark hall. I do not know what it was shouting, but it kept shouting at me. While I was walking backward, facing this thing, I woke up and then did the regular things I did in my everyday life, but I noticed that everything was kind of dull in color, and some points were just blurry in my day. Then, at one point, my father told me someone, I do not remember who, some relative, had died. Eerily calmly, he did. I remained calm too, externally at least. Inside, I was flipping out. My father then told me to go to sleep so we could go to the funeral after I had slept. At that point, I realized that this had been a dream. I tried waking up, but I could not. I was beginning to freak out. I was convinced it was a dream, but I could not wake up. At that point, I realized that this had been a dream. I tried waking up, but I could not. I woke up, this time for real, confused as hell. October 25th, 2018. I was watching this video where a John Wayne Gacy-looking clown sat leaning against a wall. He had a sad expression, and he just sat there for a while. Something was awfully sad about that whole scene. The clown then got up and went off camera, while I kept staring at his wall in the video until the sound of a chainsaw could be heard in the background. A few moments later, the camera was thrown aside or something. It just flew, and the perspective shifted to a foot of a bed or a table. The sound of the chainsaw roaring took over the whole video, and I could make out sobbing in the background too. Soon enough, sickening crunching and gurgling sounds were audible too. In my dream self's head, I knew that the clown had killed himself, but I had no idea how, not until I heard a repetitive thumping sound. Something with hairs rolled into the edge of the video frame. I heard the sounds of canine claws scraping the floor filled the video, and I woke up. June 21st, 2019. A raccoon-like creature was clawing at an elderly couple until they had died from blood loss. He just scratched them all over, mercilessly, while making cheerful sounds. I wanted to do something about it. The creature did not seem bigger than a small child, but I could not. I tried moving toward it, but I was stuck in place. My world then shifted. I was in a child's room during a thunderstorm. A child was talking to that same raccoon-like figure. He asked for his grandparents, but the creature told him that he could not have them. The creature told the child that he could not have his grandparents because they had killed themselves as a result of a schizophrenic delusion. The kid did not seem to mind. My dream ended, and I was in total darkness. Another dream followed. I was in what appeared to be New York during the 1920s. Everything was colored black and white, and there was this sad music playing in the background. My vision cleared up, and I saw a sea of women hanging from the street lamps, swinging softly to the sounds of the melancholic melody. July 4th, 2019. I was urban exploring when I entered this abandoned factory building at the edge of my town. I explored it for a bit, and there was nothing particularly odd about the building. I entered a dark room that appeared to be awfully small, giving me claustrophobia, and then I suddenly saw this naked woman standing in the center. She had huge butterfly wings sticking out of her back and some sort of thorny appendages coming out of her chest, like vines. She had a crown of thorns on her head that made her bleed, and the worst part about her was how her eye sockets were empty, and streams of dried blood were visible on her cheeks. She called out something in a language I could not comprehend. A deformed, dog-like creature came out of the darkness with its head lowered. Once I could completely make it out. The thing raised its head, and I saw its dolphin-like mug, smooth and bottle-nosed, hidden in between two thick bangs of black fur. The animal smiled at me, shining human teeth. I woke up, covered in cold sweat. That was last night, and I think I saw that thing, that nightmare dog again, a few moments ago as I was writing this. It is kind of dark already, and I cannot see the details of the room across from mine that well. I do think that I saw a dolphin-like head poking in the darkness, with two shining white blank eyeballs staring back at me before it faded into the darkness again, producing the sound of canine claws scraping against the floor. It definitely was not my dog. She is sleeping right at my feet. I did check, and there was nothing there. Not to mention how my dog usually reacts to noises outside the house, let alone in. Maybe I am just not sleeping enough. Ignorance is bliss. No phrase holds more truth to it than this. I truly envy clueless people with their clueless dreams. Clueless people with options I do not have. Clueless people with family and friends. I envy people who are not lonely. And I envy people who strive to learn more. I guess I envy many kinds of people. Ironically, many people are likely to envy me, due to their blissful ignorance. I'm writing this entry here simply because this is the internet. I'm bored, and because most likely no one would take it seriously. But I do not really mind. I have told this story countless times. I like telling stories, mostly because for me, at this point, hearing them is pointless. I have heard it all. Nothing surprises me anymore. Speaking of surprises, though, the current song that the YouTube playlist is running reminds me of my own past in a way. Not many things do anymore. It is called Mr. Dr. Man by a relatively new band named Palais Royal. I definitely recommend you listen to it. There is a certain part in that song that caught my attention. There is this little story I would like to tell about this little boy who came from hell. Sit right there and listen real good. I will tell you the ways he is misunderstood. This part embodies the story of me and my brother perfectly, even though I doubt it was intended to represent the misery of a bitter old man. Regardless, I would like you to sit right there and pay attention real good to the little story I would like to tell as the man who is so misunderstood. I want you to take this story about a little boy who came from hell to heart. Long ago, I used to have a younger brother whom I loved dearly. He was the closest human being to me. Like all siblings, we had our ups and downs. But no matter what happened, I had his back and he had mine on everything. I failed him once, however, and this one failure turned out to be a fatal one. It all started when we were kids, and my brother would run off into the woods next to the village we used to live in at the time. Back then, there was nothing out of the ordinary about kids playing in the woods alone. It was a much more innocent time back then. My younger brother would come back every day from the woods and talk about some kind of shiny sky people. Our parents did not think much of it. I mean, all kids have a wild imagination. It is just a part of being a child. That all changed when my brother failed to come back home after dark one time. Our parents got worried sick, and so did I. My old man began searching for him everywhere in that forest. He even got other townsfolk to help him, but to no avail. My kid brother was nowhere to be found. It was like the earth had swallowed him whole. All hope was lost. We had begun thinking of the worst, wondering about how he had met his end. My mother broke down once father returned home alone. I had never seen her so devastated before. The sight of my wailing mother and the idea of losing my beloved brother drove me to tears. I had never cried that much before. That night, none of us could sleep. We were too preoccupied with thinking about the lost child, about our lost loved one. Then in the dark of night, the door to our house creaked. It made me jolt from my bed. Chills ran down my body. I stood up and walked slowly towards the entrance door. I remember being in a trance-like state, jumbled thoughts running through my mind, my body too tired due to the prolonged stress inflicted upon it. He stood there at the entrance to our house, unharmed and unscathed, my younger brother. A rush of adrenaline pumped through my veins, and I charged at my brother, hugging him tightly with tears streaming down my cheeks. He was at a loss of words. He had no idea why I was so emotional about seeing him. He did not seem to understand what kind of pain he had caused us. I began questioning him about where he had been and what had happened to him. By that point, our parents stood by us, excited to see their child alive and well. My brother's response to my questions did not worry me, nor did it make me happy. His response outright pissed me off. He began spewing what I perceived as childish nonsense about the sky people he'd been mentioning in the past. I was so angered by the idea that a mere imaginary thing could make me lose my brother that I snapped at him. And I slapped him. I slapped him for the first and only time in our lives. I slapped him so hard he fell down to the ground and began crying. I slapped him and barked at him to never mention these stupid sky people, to forget about them once and for all. Of course, after the initial shock of my parents wore off, they scolded me for my actions. But I guess my disapproval of this idea had led my brother to forget about it because, after that night, he stopped mentioning the sky people and would only vanish into the forest to work there. Our relationship was not really strained by the incident. We kept on being each other's pillars. We remained the perfect best friends. The years passed, and we left our home village, started our own families, and carried on with our lives separately. Sure, we were not as close as we used to be as kids, but we still had each other's backs, and we were pretty much always in touch. One day, during high noon, my brother showed up in the distance. He appeared to be exhausted and battered, carrying an ass's jaw in hand. I ran towards him, grabbed him, and began questioning him as to what had happened to him. I would help him with virtually anything. The sky people, they are not imaginary as we thought. That was his initial response. I let go of him, fear creeping from the top of my head to the bottom of my foot soles. I was wondering whether my brother was insane, or if the sky people had actually been just nasty, evil humans all along, that did despicable things to my sibling when he was a child. Before I could verbally respond to my distressed brother, he shattered my silence by uttering the scariest thing I had heard up to this point. "Kill me, brother. Kill me and burn my remains. Do not let them get me." Well, no. He would not relent. "Kill me. Please kill me. I cannot do this. You have to. They are doing terrible things to me. Just looking at them is killing me." He began weeping. "I cannot. No. I have to die. Do not you get it?" He lunged at me with the ass jawbone, tackling me to the floor, screaming in my face about how I must end his life. I kicked him off myself, trying to calm him down, but he just lunged at me again. This time I grabbed him by the arms, and we began wrestling over control of his weapon. He kept begging violently to be killed, and I kept on trying to stop him before either of us could be hurt. I did not want to hurt my brother. I could not stop him. I just could not. I had to put him in a chokehold to slow him down, but he kept thrashing his hands around, trying to force me to suffocate him to death. Luckily, he passed out before that. Once he passed out, I let go of his limp body. I regret doing it to this day. He fell down, hard, his skull. It landed straight on top of the jagged side of the jawbone. My brother was dead. I had killed him. The world stopped moving at that moment for me, even though I had kids and a loving wife. I even had a dog. But he was the most precious person to me in the world, and I had just killed him. I grabbed his now lifeless body and hugged it as hard as I possibly could, crying and moaning in agony over what I had just done. Before dusk, I forced myself to bury the body of my own flesh and blood. I did it in secrecy. I did not want anyone knowing I had committed fratricide. You may call it accidental, you may call it self-defense, and you may even call it assisted suicide. But for me and the rest of the world, this was murder. A man killing his brother was first attested in the Old Testament. That story is about my brother and me. While the story contains many misconceptions, the core is nothing but the truth. I had murdered my brother over a matter regarding beings residing technically in the sky. By this point, I guess you have figured out who I am. Anyhow, after burying my brother and lying to my family that I was notified of his sudden death, I had to keep on acting as if nothing had happened, but I simply could not. The stress caused by what I had done was taking its toll on my body and mind. I could not sleep straight at night. In my dreams, I kept seeing his limp body laying on the ground, an ass jawbone stuck in his head, those lightless, glossy eyes of his, the blood below him. All of this, it was haunting me. That was just the beginning for me. However, you cannot even imagine how much worse all of this had gotten 2 weeks after I had murdered my dear brother. I laid in bed with my wife, and we slept. My routine nightmares disturbed my sleep, and in the middle of that night, I awoke drenched in sweat. Something was off in the air. It was like there was a large amount of static electricity in that room. I felt as if I was in the middle of a thundercloud about to explode. I grabbed my head between my hands and cursed myself silently before lying down and closing my eyes once more. Surprisingly, sleep came quickly after, and it was blissful, of the kind I had not had in a while. The room was getting warmer and warmer. With each passing moment, the room was getting warmer. By the time the change was noticeable, I was sweaty and uncomfortable. I tried moving, but I was stuck. Something was holding me back. I tried moving once more, but I simply could not. Panic set in. My eyes shot open. I wish I had not. In front of me was a huge, face-like thing made out of bright, painfully bright light. Its features were distorted and barely discernible, yet at the same time so sharp all at once. It was nothing but a spherical shape with jagged slits that would not stop reforming grotesquely, as if to give it an appearance of a being with eyes and a mouth. I wanted to scream, but could not, as if my mouth had been sewn shut. I felt the air rise up my throat, but it would not come out of my mouth. I tried thrashing around, but my body would not budge. I was stuck in the middle of a hot, bright space. More of these floating, face-shaped abominations began sprouting around me. There were so many of them. They were a legion. It was horrible. I felt like my heart was going to burst through my ribcage and kill me in the process. I had begun wishing for that. The faces were screeching something in a language I did not understand, but their voices, they were so high, it felt like they were stabbing me through my eardrums. If you thought that was the end of it, you are wrong. Soon, this space had begun heating up even more, up to the point where everything became blurry. At least, I found some solace in the blurry shape these monstrosities took in my eyes. Eventually, when the heat got too much to bear, I passed out. I woke up not far from my house. My whole body hurt as if I was run over by a tank, but there were no visible changes on my person. My mind, though. Oh, that is a whole different story. Everything, literally every single thing made me remember those faces. Fuck. I still remember what these abominations looked like, even though it has been so long since I last saw them. If these are the sky people Abel was talking about, he must have been one heck of a brave child, because those horrors, they are the most horrible things I have ever seen. I did not tell my wife and child about the occurrence. I did not want to sound like a madman back then, so I kept it all to myself. A few years later, my wife and child died in a fire, along with most of my village. Traumatized, depressed, and in so much pain, the death of my family and friends drove me over the edge. I had decided to end it all. I had decided to end my life. I threw myself off a cliff. I felt my body hit the ground below, awful pain at the side of the neck, and then numbness of everything below for a few moments, and then peace, cold, dark, empty. Peace. Something forced me to breathe. My eyes shot open. I was alive. My first thoughts were, no, 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 followed by, how can this be? The next few months were nothing but endless suicide attempts. Anything from throwing myself off high places to drowning myself in the river. All of that ended when I threw myself into a volcano nearby. First, it hurt like a son of a bitch. And second, you do not drown in lava, you just catch fire. Clearly, I have survived. Those were some of the hardest years of my life, physically speaking. After that, I made it my life's mission to end my own life. Mostly because being physically immune to death does not make me less of a human, and eventually my emotional side took over. Time and time again, I got attached and ended up seeing the people I loved slip away from me. I ended up seeing them die on me. This had led me to try and be a hermit, which worked for a while, until some fool from Mesopotamia came looking for the secret to eternal life. Assuming more like him would find me, I left my little cave and started wandering again, until I came across more people, which led me to more attachment and pain. For the most part, the emotional stress was the hardest thing to deal with. Eventually, the boredom overcame even that. I have done everything, seen everything, and felt everything. I tried any kind of sex, pretty much came up with most of the Kama Sutra, and slept with a bunch of important people throughout the years, for those who care. Caesar was both passive and active. Speaking of the Roman Empire, I kind of invented Jesus, you see. I thought that by goading a Roman governor in Judea enough, he would abuse me and my eventual corpse into oblivion. That did not work out well, and instead I had given the world a new religion, a ridiculous one at that. I have been everywhere too, tried killing myself by infecting myself with a plague infection twice. The first time was when I went to Constantinople during Justinian's plague, and the second when I was in England during the rampage of the Black Death through Europe. For a while I had given up hope on being able to die finally. And then the last century rolled around and we got mustard gas and World War I. I tried it. It did not work. It hurt. Oh, hell it did. Almost like the lava. But it did not kill me, no matter the dose, and I have tried a lot of that stuff. During World War II, I gave myself to Mengele, but the famed Angel of Death could not end my life either. If I had not been around to see the likes of Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan, in another life I would have been definitely against the Nazis and their silly little ideology, but honestly, in this life I could not care any less. My latest attempt at dying was Chernobyl. I messed a little with the reactors and boom. Radiation sickness was the closest to dying. I vomited and defecated any kind of liquid content inside my body. Shortly after the exposure, my skin and some muscles began to fall off, but it seems like I did not get enough radiation to completely destroy my genetic structure, because everything just started regrowing slowly back into place. Honestly, I do not know what was more agonizing, losing over 80% of my skin and some of my musculature, or regrowing all of that, while I basically shit myself half to death daily for months on end. I guess I should destroy another nuclear plant or two. For now, I have admitted myself to this nice mental institution, simply to avoid the emotional headache for the next few years. Even though the medication they give me here is not as good as I thought it would be, I have tasted so much better with much better effects. That is about all I have had to say. Seems like this is the end of the little story about the misunderstood little boy from hell. Maybe I should visit my dear old friend Elizabeth Windsor after I am out of here. Even though I envy her aged beauty, she gets more beautiful by the year. What do you think? Should I visit my queen of a friend in a few years? I hope that she does not leave me alone here too. Do you know what is really funny, though? The fact that the staff here let a man they dub behind his back a hopeless mad creep with no chance of recovery, like me, access the internet. Hell, that is not even the funniest thing about this place. These idiots that work here, they did not even take that old jawbone away from me. I have kept it as a reminder of what I have become for all these years. And right now I think that the only thing that would ease my boredom would be to use this jawbone on someone's throat. So I'm in a bit of a pickle here. Not in a pickle even. I got stuck in a gutter filled with rotten cucumbers. Figuratively speaking, the worst imaginable thing that could have happened to me happened. Well, not really. I mean, not to me. Fuck. Can't even explain myself. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, 2 days ago, I was walking back home from the bar, and it was 2 in the morning. I had a get-together with some friends, and we had a beer. I wasn't drunk, I think. I'm not sure, given what happened afterward. I do know that I only drank 1 beer. So, to cut the story short, I was making my way home out of the local bar, and my house is like a small ranch right out of town. My grandparents used to own the place, and I got it as a present when I turned 21. There were no ghost stories or whatever about this place, even though it's practically surrounded by a dark and seemingly lifeless forest. No ghost stories I know of. Anyway, we might have one now, though. Getting ahead of myself. Anyhow, I'm making my way to the edge of the town, and it's dark as fuck. You can't see 3 feet away from you. So I'm just walking casually. I didn't need to hurry home or anything. My sister was the only person living with me, and she wouldn't care as long as I showed up home in one piece. Suddenly, I felt something tug at my arm, and before I could even react, something yanked off my feet and dragged me by my shirt, pushing me against the wall. Everything happened so fucking fast. Before I knew it, some emaciated, pale-ass motherfucker was screeching and spewing spit all over me. I didn't even notice the knife this cunt held up to me until he grazed my neck. I panicked and shoved him off with all my force. He lunged at me again, like some rabid animal, so I wrestled him to the ground and wrested control of his knife. I tossed that away and kicked him in the head. He didn't move after that, so I just stormed away. During the struggle, my phone fell out, and he stepped on the damn thing, destroying it. Trust me, this is an important detail. I made my way home safely after that. Once home, I was about to take a shower and let myself forget the whole ordeal. I was already beginning to calm down from the whole thing when someone knocked on my door really fucking hard. So all pissed off, I marched to the door to see who that was. I slammed the door open, about to blow up at whoever it happened to be, only to see that pale, emaciated son of a bitch trying to plow his way into my fucking home with his head and hands bloodied. I tried to slam the door shut, but he was trying really hard to keep it open. I thought at that moment that I was dealing with some legit Frankenstein thing, based on his appearance and strength relative to that appearance, not to mention how he was making all these disgusting sounds. At this point, my sister, Adriana, came out of her room, asking what all the noise was. I had never seen her so startled in my life. I swear once she saw this motherfucker, she jumped in her place. I tried explaining that I had no idea who or what he was, but I told her that I needed her to call the cops. Smart girl. Without hesitating, she ran back to her room. She came back like 5 seconds later, wide-eyed and without color in her skin. I screamed at the top of my lungs in frustration, and at the same time this freak managed to push his lanky arm through the door, and at that moment I was having none of it. So I pulled the door back a little and then slammed it right onto his arm. He didn't even fucking scream. He didn't even feel the pain. He just kept trying to push himself inside. I just slammed the door over and over and over on his arm, and maybe in his face, while screaming at Adriana to get the baseball bat. And when she got it, I instructed her to whack him as hard as she can with it once I opened the door. She simply nodded and cocked the wooden weapon in her arms. She took the stance of a rifleman about to shoot, and I let go of the door. The creature made his way, screaming and flailing its limbs all over. He stumbled right into Addie's bat. She beat him to a bloody pulp. Addie shattered his, well, everything. I think he was bleeding even from his nuts. There was a wet spot on his pants in between the legs. Once he stopped moving sharply, she stopped beating him. Not wanting whatever the fuck that was in with us, I grabbed myself a pair of gloves and carried him outside on my shoulders. Trust me, I burned the shirt and scrubbed myself like 5 times after that. I ended up dumping him in the forest, like 20 minutes away by foot from our ranch. Addie was walking behind me the whole time, baseball bat cocked in her arms. Who knew a 5'3" kid could batter someone so hard? So yeah, we just kind of dumped him there, all battered and bloody. Oh, and yeah, he was alive or functional anyway. He kept grunting and moaning from time to time as I carried him on my shoulders. Fast forward to this morning, I heard on the news that the police are still looking for a deeply disturbed middle-aged man who escaped from this psychiatric ward. I immediately thought of that freak. My heart sank when they showed the escapee's photo. I hope we didn't kill that man. 'Cause he was no monster. He was just a delusional man who stumbled onto a couple of young and impulsive siblings with no means to call the cops.